Greetings and salutations. Welcome to EzeeLinux Q&A, episode 16. All you beautiful people all around the world, it is time that I answered your questions once again. It has been quite some time since I have done a Q&A video. I haven't really been getting a whole lot of questions, especially in YouTube comments, and the ones that I have gotten have been very specific and don't make for good videos. But in the last couple of weeks, the YouTube comments have exploded, and I have gotten a bunch of questions, and we're going to jump into some of them right now. Later on in the video, at the end, I want to talk a little bit about some of the reaction that I got from the last video I posted. That's been exciting, so there's some things to talk about there as well. But first, let's start out with Ron Holte's comment, or Holtet. I'm not really sure how to say your name, Ron. Joe, what about dual booting or multi-booting different Linux distros on same hardware? All Linux, no Windows. Thanks for any input. Also, if I install multiple Linux systems, can I share the same /home directory? That is a two-part question. So the first part, we're talking about dual booting, which means that you have more than one operating system running on the same computer. Anybody who has followed this channel for any period of time will know that I warn against dual booting Linux and Windows, especially if you are a newbie. This would be somebody who doesn't understand how disks and partitions work, and they don't understand how bootloaders work, and UEFI, and secure boot, and all of this stuff that goes into it. Windows has a nasty habit with updates of blowing out the bootloader, and then all of a sudden your Linux doesn't work. And if you don't know how to fix that, then that might be a problem for you. Also, anytime that you are messing around with the bootloader or the partitions on your disks, there is always the chance that something could go wrong. Your data could be corrupted. Your machine could be turned into a brick. So if you're going to be messing around with dual booting at all, make sure that you have backups of all of your personal data. It is not good enough to have a backup partition on the same machine. Even if it's a separate drive that's hooked permanently to the machine, don't do that. You need a separate off-the-machine backup, whether that be network storage or whether that be an external drive that you plug in, because there's always the chance that something could blow up. And even if you're not dual booting, that's true as well. Hard drives fail, power supplies go crazy and fry everything in the computer. You never know what's going to happen. So as long as you understand that, we will proceed. Now, if you are going to be dual booting, and you're going to be dual booting more than one Linux distribution, that would be a little bit safer than dual booting with Windows, simply because of the fact that Linux tends to respect Linux, and they both are going to be using the grub bootloader. So one Linux distribution will recognize that grub is already there, and you probably have like a master Linux distribution. It'll be the first one that you install. So when you boot it into that, you would, let's say that you installed Ubuntu first and then OpenSUSE second. So when you boot it in, you would probably see Ubuntu's bootloader come up, but then it would let you go into OpenSUSE. As far as trying to use the same /home directory, technically, that is possible, because you can create a partition for Ubuntu, a partition for OpenSUSE, then create another partition that would be your /home for both. And you could point the distributions at it at install by doing a manual install, a manual setup when you were running the installer. However, what you're probably going to have happen is that you're going to run into some really weird conflicts. No two distributions of Linux run the same version of the same software at the same time. And so your configuration and personal settings will all go into your home directory. And what will happen is if you run one that's running software version 1.2 on something and the next one's 1.4, for instance, not too far off, there may be a difference in those configuration files, and you might get all kinds of weird conflicts. Could very well happen. So I would avoid doing that. What I would do if I was going to set it up would be to just have two equal partitions and then have the home directories be in those partitions along with the systems. And then what you could do is come up with a way to sync what you need to keep synced up between the two of them. It would be safer to do that. So once again, using the Ubuntu OpenSUSE example, let's say you'd boot into Ubuntu it would go over and check and see if anything changed in the OpenSUSE, and then the script would sync everything up. Very easy to do with rsync and a little bit of scripting. Another thing that you could do, a little bit more complicated, would be to have a separate data partition on the drive, not a home partition, but one that's just going to have data in it, and then you could use symlinks to the directories that you have in your home directory for each system, like music, documents, downloads, whatnot, and that could all go to the same place. But now we're really getting complex. You see what I mean? So yeah, do whatever you want to do with it, but just keep in mind that it gets weirder and more complicated as you go along. I personally have never seen the need to dual boot anything. Early on, when I first started playing around with Linux, I used to dual boot Linux and Windows XP. But that was like years ago. And now it's gotten much more complicated to do that with things like UEFI and Secure Boot and all of that. So just proceed with caution and make sure you have backups. Next question. I am a new Linux Mint user. When I get comfortable with Linux, should I change to something like Arch? Because Linux Mint is the quote-unquote newbie distro. And that comes to us from a YouTube user called LOL. You do not have to change anything. If you are happy with Linux Mint and it is working for you and doing what you need it to do, please feel free to stay with it. There is no pressure whatsoever to move on to anything else. Linux Mint is very good for new users simply because when you install it, there's not a whole lot to do. It's all automated. You check one box, you get all your codecs, all your fonts, everything's set up. And as soon as it boots up, bam, you're good to go. You have a whole bunch of software installed that's good software. They have some really nifty tools in there. They're basic X apps. They're cool. Most people who have used Windows for years can sit down in front of a Linux Mint system running Cinnamon or the Mate desktop, and they'll be very happy. This is why I recommend it to newbies. But it is not necessarily a newbie distro. It's just a distro that kind of does a lot of the stuff for you. So it's also actually really good for Linux users who just are lazy and don't really like configuring anything. So if that's you, stick with it. Now, if you decide later on that you want to try other things, hey, go ahead. But there's no huge advantage to go to another distro. There's no real reason to do that. It's not like that Arch is necessarily better. It's just that it's a different way of doing things and a more hands-on approach, and you have to do a lot more configuration. If that appeals to you, look into it, but it's entirely up to you. I really don't get on people's cases and tell them that they need to use a certain distribution. I don't even do a whole lot of distribution review videos anymore. And the reason why I don't do that is because I am very much happy in my little Ubuntu Linux Mint world. And I don't really feel the need to step out of that anymore. I just don't. This is where I am. Not only do I use software in this, I've written software for this platform, and the software that I do use, I know it's available, and I just don't really feel the need to reach out of that. But if something else works good for you, some people are really into Manjaro, they're really into Arch or OpenSUSE. That's great. Whatever works for you. It's different horses for different courses, and I'm happy for you. So, next question comes from Tom B. I would like to use, including sysadministrate, that's his spellings, not mine, a Linux OS via a GUI, which is short, by the way, for Graphic User Interface, also called a GUI, and not have to use the CLI, which is short for Command Line Interface. Is that possible? And if so, how? Many Linux distributions can be installed and you can use them without ever having to open a terminal. You're talking about like Linux Mint, Manjaro is another one. There are Ubuntu to some extent, but Ubuntu is not as user-friendly as Linux Mint or Manjaro. You still have to do a little configuration, and I find that doing a lot of that in the command line to be the way to go. Now, if you're talking about system administration and you're talking about administering servers, No, there's really no other way to do that. With a server, you're going to be logging in through SSH. If you're administrating that system, then not really. You can do it all by point and click. Every once in a great while, I get somebody who adds a comment and says nasty things about using a command line. They call it archaic, and they say it should be abolished, and it is useless in 2018, and blah, 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 blah. These people, when they say this, really honestly, and I mean this in a nice way, are showing their ignorance. And you should not listen to these people, because they do not know of what they speak. The command line in Linux is the most powerful feature, and every Linux user should take a little bit of time to learn a little bit about it. If you're going to be living with Linux on a daily basis, for whatever reason, I think that it behooves you to learn a little bit about it. And there are so many good books and videos out there that you can get an introduction to. It doesn't mean that you have to learn how to do everything by memory or be a super hacker or anything like that. But a little bit of understanding of how to navigate there goes a long way. Because if you're going to have help from people when you have a problem with your computer, chances are they're going to be sending you commands. Because it's easier than saying, click here, point there, check that box, do this, do that. It's just a whole hell of a lot easier. So the more you know, the more power you have. Running a Linux distribution and not using the command line is sort of like going out and spending $100,000 on a super fast European sports car and never taking the machine out of past third gear. It's stupid. It's like, why would you do that? If you don't want to use a command line, get a Chromebook. It's just that simple. You don't... that's a little harsh. Let me back that up. What I'm trying to say here is that there is so much power in that command line interface that for me, even back when I was using Windows, I used to do things in what they called the command line, which is really meager compared to what you get with Linux. And it's just so much easier to open something up and type something in, or learn how to do scripting where you can write your own little programs you can automate. So don't be afraid of that. Go out and learn something about it. Absolutely. So let us move on here. I know that people say Linux is a Unix-like OS, but isn't it absurd to say that Linux is not based on Unix? Well, it's not based on Unix. When you base something off of something, you start with it and then you build upon it. That's not what Linus Torvalds did, or even Richard Stallman with the Free Software Foundation and GNU. These were Unix work-alike systems. Okay? So it means that it's going to look and act like it, but doesn't really have anything to do with the original. And that's important because the original, at that particular point in time when you're talking about Unix, was proprietary. And so therefore, they couldn't modify it. They couldn't change it. They couldn't build on it. So what they did, starting out with Richard Stallman and the Free Software Foundation and GNU, and then Linus Torvalds came up with a Linux kernel, and we put GNU and Linux together, and we have this thing that we now call Linux. And I know that drives people crazy. I'll talk more about that at the end, but anyway. So it's not necessarily based on it. It's a work-alike. And that is very confusing for people who come to it for the first time. So yes, Mark, I understand where you're coming from. I was doing a video many years ago when I started doing these videos, and I accidentally said in the video that Linux was based on Unix, and believe me, a lot of people jumped up very quickly to correct me. No, it's not based on Unix. It is a work-alike, and that's how it is. I need some help. My computer has 32-bit Windows, but my processor supports 64-bit. Which one should I install? And that comes from, I guess, Bilas. Not really sure how to say your name. Well, what you should do is install what your processor can use. And in this day and age, you need to install 64-bit Linux if at all possible. The only reason that 32-bit Linux still exists is backward compatibility to very old hardware these days. And when you go with 32-bit Linux, you're going to find that a lot of things don't work anymore, like Google Chrome doesn't have a 32-bit version, and there are many other programs like that. So the only reason that anybody should actually be running 32-bit is if they absolutely have to, and they have a machine that will not support 64-bit. 5 or 10 years ago, you may have heard it go around, they'd say that the 64-bit version of Linux distributions was not as stable as 32-bit, and you should go with 32 because it's more stable. These days, that's absolutely positively not true. It may have been true, like I said, 10 years ago, but not now. So you should always go with the 64-bit version. Have you thought of creating a Discord server instead of a forum? And that comes to us from Abdullah. And the answer to that question is it was thought about, but we did not do it. And he is referring to EzeeTalk, which is the forum that we launched not too long ago. You can go to EzeeLinux.com and you can check that out for yourself. We did not want to use anybody else's infrastructure for our own forum. The idea here is that we control everything. When you go to EzeeTalk, it is a forum which is run on our own server, and we have absolute control of that from the OS out to the forum software and the database and the security and everything about it. And we wanted to have something, when I say we, I'm talking about me and Jeremy O'Connell from CyberWeb Solutions, who has been very generous with his knowledge and time helping to get that started. And the problem with creating a Discord or a Reddit page or any one of these things is that you are subject to the whims of whoever runs the service. And if they decide to change the way it works, if they decide to change their policy or privacy or whatever, then there's not a thing you can do about it. In the case of EzeeTalk, since it's running on our own software, on our own server, we have complete control, and I think that's a lot more secure for users who want to be a part of that community. And the forum software that we're using is very powerful. There's a lot of options in there. You can do a lot of neat things, like you can post code, which is really important. You can post links to pics and videos and embed things, and you can really do a lot there. It's a wonderful piece of software called MyBB that we use, and it's just a one step of it's I think it's a little safer. Let's put it that way. I think it's a little safer for the user, and it's safer for us as well because we don't have to worry about the whims of some big company somewhere taking it away. Hey Joe, what program are you using to write this out on the command line? And that is a question that was posted on another video where I used the same piece of software that you're looking at now. And the answer to that question is that it is a program called Show. And it is something that I wrote myself to be able to take text and throw it up on a screen like that, and it will justify the text and you don't see anything around it. So this is what it looks like. This is a full screen terminal, and if I just make it smaller, you can see what that looks like. And that is what we're using. It's a program called Show, and I just accidentally exited, but that's good. I can show you how it works. So I can open this up, and then if I hit the spacebar, it tells me there are no more files. I can have as many text files in a row as I want to and use the spacebar to go between them like a presentation. And then when it gets done and you get that no more files down there, that just lets you know that the next time that you push a button, you will just end up at a terminal. So you can get Show on my GitHub page. And to get to it, just go to EzeeLinux.com, look under Bash Scripts, and it'll take you directly to it, and then you can play with this yourself. Just drag it into your bin folder or user local bin or whatever, however you use your scripts if you are a script type person, and then you can make the thing work for you. It's a part of a little suite of programs that I have available up on GitHub, and you can check that out at the EzeeLinux Bash scripts page. So there you go. It is my little Q&A video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to just take a couple of seconds here and talk about the last video I posted where I talked about Linus Torvalds taking a break, and we got into a little bit of a discussion about hypocrisy in free and open source software communities and all that other stuff. I got a tremendous response from that video. That video has gone crazy, and people have expressed a multitude of opinions. And the ones that did not include hate speech in their comments have been left up. I really haven't had to prune that a whole lot to get rid of just sheer nastiness. One person said, well, how can you talk about freedom of speech, but yet you say that on YouTube that you prune the comments? It's because it's my YouTube channel, Jack. That's why. In that video, I also talked about how I didn't like the video that posted before that, the comparison between Windows and Linux that I did. It just didn't come out the way I wanted it to. And this one person posted, you do know that you can use software to edit these videos and you don't have to do it all at once. Yes, I understand that you can edit videos like that, and many people on YouTube do. I don't have time for it. I would rather sit down and just talk and let it roll through instead of trying to go back and listen to it again and pick it apart. And I think that makes for a more live and interesting thing to listen to. I really have gotten to a place where not only with YouTube videos but in television programs that I find the overproduction and the flying graphics and the craziness to be very annoying. I think it's distracting from the programming itself. And like I said, this is true in television and YouTube videos. And then there are people out there that are using voice synthesizers instead of voicing their own videos, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And I make mistakes. It's human, but also can be really awesome because every now and again something kind of magical happens in a live setting that you're not going to get if you go back and cut things up and redo it. You can't really catch that lightning in a bottle. So I hope that kind of shows on the videos. But yes, I do know that I could edit it. I just simply don't have time. And I suck at editing anyway. This makes it easy. If I want to sit down and do a video, because I can just do screen captures, and I can show you a terminal, and I can do this so easy that I just sit down and do it. Do the research, read up on it, whatever I need to talk to, it's great, and then I post whatever I get. Now, I can pause the video with the software that I'm using to capture, but that's it. So I do pause occasionally for one reason or the other. And for those of you who ask, I use a little program here called Simple Screen Recorder to do these videos, and a good microphone. That's it. I use a CAD, CAD audio CAD, U37 condenser mic, and this program, and that's it. That's what I use. A lot of people who do videos on YouTube, especially about Linux, they use a program called OBS, which is really cool. It's too complex for me. I don't have time to learn that. I'm not going to... This works for me. This is what I do. So it is what it is. I'm not going to recommend and say that it's the better way to do it, but I would say that probably overproducing your videos won't help. Keep it real. So yes, that was one thing that came up from that last video. I was really surprised. There's people asking a lot of questions in the Linux world right now, and there are people out there who have a lot to say. Now, I do want to make sort of a retraction. In that particular video, I kind of got off on this tangent about people calling Linux GNU/Linux, and that bugged me, and that people posted that thing where it says, might I interject for a moment, usually starts out with that. And I got to thinking about that after I did the video, and I went, why should I care? I'll call it Linux. You can call it whatever you want to. I don't care if you call it George as long as you use it. So I kind of want to backpedal on that a little bit. So if you saw the first video and it was like, I kind of made a big deal about that. And even in some of the comments afterward, I went, it's kind of stupid. And then I went back and realized I was being kind of stupid. I was like, who cares? Call it whatever you want to. I will continue to call it Linux. I think Linux is the best thing to call it. So there we go, gang. That is my little video for this week. Thank you for watching. Your feedback is always welcome. I've been getting great feedback lately. Great feedback. Please be sure to give EzeeLinux a like on Facebook if you are a Facebook user. Some things pop up there that you're not going to see in the videos. It happens on occasion. Also, check out EzeeLinux.com. That is the portal to everything that has to do with the EzeeLinux community. Check out Easy Talk while you're there. Check out the Bash Scripts page. And there is also links there to Facebook. So you can go directly to that page if you're interested in taking a look at that. Check out freedompenguin.com for more stuff about Linux from contributors such as myself. There's always some cool things to look at on the freedompenguin.com page. And a great distribution review of Solus was just posted by Matt Hartley. So you might want to check that one out when you go there. I'm sure it'll be there. Thanks, gang. We will do it again soon.